The Toyota Land Cruiser is one of the auto industry's longest-lasting, and many would say, most widely respected brands. In continuous production since the 1950s, it is Toyota's longest-selling vehicle and a living piece of automotive history. The Land Cruiser helped Toyota gain credibility as a maker of tough, durable vehicles at a time when Japanese automakers needed to convince skeptical buyers. It was also one of the first vehicles Toyota imported to the United States, helping to establish the reputation that turned Toyota into one of the best-selling brands in the country.
The Land Cruiser is the only model in the Toyota lineup that has been available for every single model year since Toyota came to the United States in 1958. Every other Toyota model has come and gone. Nothing has been in the market with that nameplate on it every single year other than a Land Cruiser.
Early versions of the Land Cruiser were known for their Spartan design and off-road capability, while later iterations became popular as a high-end family hauler in the SUV-crazed 1990s. But in 2019, the Land Cruiser appears to be disappearing from the US, attracting just 1/5 of the buyers who bought it at the peak of its appeal. At least one report holds that Toyota will pull the Land Cruiser from the US around 2023. Some in the industry even say it might be time for the Land Cruiser to go. Others say the vehicle could find success again in this SUV-crazed market if Toyota strips it down and returns it to its rugged roots. So what happened? Why, when trucks and SUVs are seeing unprecedented levels of popularity in the United States, is the Land Cruiser selling only a few thousand units? How did it go from being a pivotal pioneer in Toyota's international strategy to an often overlooked product? Toyota's truck heritage can be traced back to its earliest days as a company. Toyota Motor was founded in the late 1930s by a young businessman who wanted to diversify the fabric weaving equipment business he had inherited from his father, as a way of protecting against the larger troubles in the textile industry. Seeing the potential in the young but growing automotive industry, Kiichiro Toyota studied the major car makers of his day, such as Ford and Chrysler, and had begun a serious effort to make cars. However, his plans were interrupted by Japan's involvement in World War II, and Toyota became a supplier of military vehicles for the Japanese war effort. After the war ended, Toyota made trucks and buses to help with Japan's reconstruction. But there was a turning point in the year 1950 when North Korea invaded South Korea and Toyota received an order from the US Armed Forces in Japan for four-wheel drive trucks.
Korea was, in '51, was really hot and heavy combat, and the UN forces were losing a lot of vehicles over there, and in order to replenish them, they had to bring them all the way from the United States. And the Army was anxious to get some vehicles built closer to the front, and obviously Japan is a puddle jump away from Korea. So they presented these bid requests to the manufacturers, and Toyota said, yeah, okay, we'll do it. So they built a utility vehicle that was based on the Army's specifications. The Army said, here's what we want, here's the Jeep that we want. So Toyota put it together.
Toyota had also competed for a bid to supply trucks to the Japanese National Police Forces, but initially lost that to Mitsubishi, which offered a version of the legendary American Willys Jeep. But Toyota improved its own model, which became known as the Toyota Jeep BJ, the letters BJ standing for B Series engine and the J standing for Jeep. Toyota demonstrated the vehicle's capability by testing it on famed rugged journeys that had only ever been made on horseback, such as by following the route of a legendary samurai's climb up Japan's Mount Atago, and another climb up a section of Mount Fuji. The improvements Toyota had been making to its truck worked, and the company won the police contract away from Mitsubishi. In the meantime, Willys had trademarked the Jeep name, forcing Toyota to abandon it. So, in 1954, Toyota chose a new name, Land Cruiser. That same year, it began exporting its Land Cruiser to other markets, first to Pakistan, then Saudi Arabia in 1955. In many cases, the Land Cruiser was the first vehicle Toyota exported to other countries, as was the case with several African nations, such as Angola, Cameroon, and South Africa in the late 1950s and early 1960s.
And they actually called it the Land Cruiser strategy when entering other markets. It was essentially the vehicle that they would bring in ahead of those passenger vehicles and those other vehicles, because they knew that there was that reputation associated with the Land Cruiser, that if they could bring that in and sell that the cars following behind it would also sell, because they're sitting there right there on the lot next to a Land Cruiser.
Land Cruisers made up nearly 40% of all vehicles exported from Japan in 1957. Toyota began selling the Land Cruiser in the US in 1958. That year, it sold just 1 unit of the vehicle, along with 287 units of Toyota's sedan, the Toyopet Crown. Due to some difficulties Toyota had with the Crown, the Land Cruiser ended up being the only model the company sold in the US from 1961 to 1965. The Land Cruiser would remain little changed for the next 2 decades, from the mid-1950s to the late 1970s. But over time, Toyota did update the vehicle, steering its design toward a more premium product with a more plush, feature-rich interior. It also grew bigger. Many of the changes coincided with the first sport utility vehicle craze in the 1990s, when the SUV became the new preferred family car, and luxury SUVs such as the Lincoln Navigator, the Cadillac Escalade, and the Land Rover Range Rover were rocketing upward in popularity. That was a peak for Land Cruiser sales in the US.
Even with the marketing and the advertising, we've got an ad here in the museum, and it shows, I think it says something like, if you want to be the CEO, drive whatever. If you want to be the chairman of the board, you drive a Land Cruiser. And that's kind of how it was marketed, was you drive this as sort of a status. But
it doesn't get any better.
Correct.
Toyota sold 18,602 Land Cruisers in 1999, the largest number in records dating back to 1973. But in 2001, sales fell to 7,591, about half of what they had been in the previous year. And they fell further from there. That same year, some trucks that could be considered close competitors suffered dips in sales too. But in the years that followed, at least some of those rebounded. Land Rover's Range Rover, for instance, is priced comparably to the Land Cruiser, and sales of that vehicle climbed from 5,771 in 2001 to 8,549 in 2002, 12,086 in 2003, and 13,546 in 2004. Both high fuel prices and a recession would put a damper on all new car sales in the later 2000s. But since the US economy has recovered in the wake of the 2007 to 2009 financial crisis, Americans have run back to their sport utilities and pickup trucks and snapped up the increasingly popular crossover, which blends elements of cars and trucks. Demand for high-end sport utility vehicles has grown along with the rest of the market, but Land Cruiser sales have not rebounded. Part of the reason for this is that the Land Cruiser has some steep competition.
At a high end, there's more and more choices when it comes to SUVs. I mean, you could get a Porsche SUV, you could get a Tesla SUV. There's more and more choices there if you're really looking for something that has that kind of presence, or you're looking for a certain brand.
Take the Range Rover. Sales of that vehicle grew from 7,800 in 2012 to slightly more than 19,000 in 2018. That is compared with little more than 3,000 Land Cruisers sold in the same year. There is also competition from within Toyota's own stable. Buyers who want the Toyota name can buy a much cheaper 3-row SUV that isn't meant to climb mountains. The automaker began marketing the similarly sized Toyota Sequoia in 2000, selling 9,925 that year. Sales skyrocketed to more than 70,000 units by 2002. However, sales of that model also fell over time to just over 11,000 in 2018.
What we've seen with the Land Cruiser is it's becoming more and more of a niche, because If you want a 3-row large SUV, these have really become cars, right? So because small SUV that started with Honda CR-Vs and Toyota RAV4s, they've grown up. Now there's mid-size ones, there's 3-row SUVs. So a vehicle like the Land Cruiser has a smaller and smaller following because people don't need that capability. They don't need to go up the Rubicon or something like that.
Toyota also sells another model that is essentially a Land Cruiser with more premium features, the Lexus LX. That model sold an additional 4,753 in 2018.
You're talking about an $85,000 vehicle, so a vehicle that starts at that price. If you look anywhere else in the market, that's being sold as a luxury vehicle. I think if you look anywhere else, it makes more sense as a Lexus. But to have Toyota selling a vehicle that could be optioned up to $100,000 doesn't really make sense in today's market.
Another reason the Land Cruiser might be struggling is simply that it has been more than a decade since Toyota updated it. With all the competition at the higher end of the market, automakers are under tremendous pressure to keep products fresh.
What does it bring to the table compared to that new competitive set that it's, against, of like large flagship SUVs? And while that's taking off, right, both from a luxury and a mainstream perspective, it's one of those things where they really, if they want to keep it alive, they have to redesign it because everyone else, like the flagship luxury car is now a flagship luxury SUV. And they're just not competing in the same space because they've gone on for so long without a redesign.
Toyota also spends little, if any, money marketing the Land Cruiser in the US. This, combined with its high price and declining sales, have led some to argue that it is time to cut the Land Cruiser entirely from Toyota's US lineup and leave only its Lexus-badged twin. At least one report has surfaced that Toyota will do exactly that in 2023. Toyota told CNBC it had no comment on plans for the Land Cruiser. But as it languishes in the US, the Land Cruiser name continues to thrive elsewhere, especially in parts of the world where people still need capable vehicles. The extent of the Land Cruiser's global renown might seem surprising to Americans unfamiliar with the vehicle's history. Toyota sold 319,200 Land Cruisers around the world in 2018. Its top 5 markets are Australia, China, Japan, the United Arab Emirates, and Russia, in that order. Toyota sold 42,300 Land Cruisers in Australia alone in 2018. The brand is so strong in some parts of the world that customers in several countries can buy versions of the truck Americans never see. For example, in many parts of the world, it still sells the Land Cruiser 70 series Toyota began making in 1984. Though US buyers can only purchase the latest Land Cruiser model, Toyota sells the rugged, functional, far lower-priced 70 series alongside more current versions in several markets. Of course, Toyota still does a strong business in trucks and sport utilities in the US. For example, the Toyota Tacoma is the top seller in the mid-size pickup category. The 4Runner, a smaller off-road sport utility, still sells well in the US. Its sales have grown from 44,316 in 2011 to 139,694 in 2018. And Toyota has expanded its Toyota Racing Development sub-brand, which has built its reputation on making tough, purpose-built, high-performance off-road vehicles. Land Cruiser loyalists say a stripped-down, more affordable Land Cruiser would be a hit in the US. Slightly more than a decade ago, the company brought the FJ Cruiser to market, a purpose-built sport utility with a boxy design that recalled elements of the early FJ Land Cruiser models. But the FJ Cruiser was discontinued in the United States and most other countries around the world, living on in only a select few markets. Americans who love the Land Cruiser legacy and what the truck did for off-roading may have to settle for another name, while looking enviously at buyers elsewhere in the world where its name is still well known and cherished.